He stood in the middle of the restaurant, in front of my in-laws, and said, "If you marry him, don't come back asking for anything." His voice didn't shake. Mine didn't either. I remember the way my husband's hand tightened around mine under the table, and the way my father refused to look at him, like poverty was contagious, like love was a downgrade. 6 months later, he sat across from me in a quiet cafe and said, "I need a favor." If you've ever been disowned for choosing love over status, stay with me. And if this story feels familiar in any way, like, comment, subscribe, but only if it truly connects. Tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes knowing someone else understands makes the weight lighter. My name is Camila Reyes. I'm 29 now. When I was little, my father used to say, "We didn't climb out of nothing for you to settle." He grew up poor. That was his origin story. It shaped everything. He built a construction company from scratch. Long hours, risky contracts, sharp instincts. By the time I was 10, we had moved into a gated community outside Phoenix. Bigger house, better schools, neighbors who talked about investments over backyard grills. He wore his success like armor, and he expected me to wear it too. I was an only child, which meant I carried all of it: the legacy, the expectations, the unspoken promise that I would marry up, or at least sideways. When I was 8, I told him I wanted to be a teacher. He laughed softly. "That's sweet, but you'll do more." More always meant richer. In college, I studied marketing. It felt safe, ambitious enough to satisfy him, flexible enough for me. That's where I met Mateo. He was majoring in social work. First red flag, according to my father. Mateo didn't have a trust fund. His parents ran a small auto repair shop. He worked part-time at a bookstore and tutored high school kids on weekends. He was steady, quiet, kind. He listened. The first time I brought him home for dinner, my father asked him 3 questions. What do you plan to earn in your first year out of school? Do you have investments? What's your 5-year net worth goal? Mateo answered honestly, no performance, no exaggeration. My father nodded, but his smile never reached his eyes. After Mateo left, he said, "He's nice, but nice doesn't pay mortgages in this neighborhood." I laughed it off then. Love makes you hopeful. But the comments didn't stop. At family gatherings, my father would introduce Mateo as Camila's friend from college, even after we'd been dating 2 years. Once, at my cousin's engagement party, he leaned in and whispered, "Don't embarrass yourself by settling." Settling. That word stayed with me. A subtle humiliation. Not loud, not explosive, just constant. Mateo never fought back. He never tried to prove himself. That irritated my father more. Ambition matters, he'd say. Mateo's ambition just looked different. When Mateo proposed, it wasn't grand. No rooftop dinner, no diamond that needed insurance paperwork. Just a quiet hike in Sedona, red rocks glowing behind us. He knelt down, nervous but sure. "I don't have everything yet," he said, "but I'll build it with you." That mattered more than numbers. When I told my father, he went silent. Not angry, not dramatic, cold. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Why?" "Because love fades. Money doesn't." I remember feeling something shift inside me then. Not rebellion, clarity. I said, "You didn't marry for money," gently. He looked at me sharply. "That's different." Because he built it. He thought Mateo never would. The week before the wedding, my father called me into his office at home, the same office where framed awards line the walls. "If you go through with this," he said calmly, "you're choosing his life over ours." I didn't understand at first. "You'll be financially independent. No help, no backup." He slid a folder across the desk. It was paperwork removing me from a family trust fund he'd created when I was born. I stared at it. "You're cutting me off?" "I'm protecting you from regret." That's what he called it. Protection. I went home that night and cried in the shower so Mateo didn't hear me. Not because I wanted the money, but because I realized my father's love had terms, and I had just violated them. I signed nothing. I didn't argue. I married Mateo anyway. And the morning after our small backyard ceremony, my father didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't come. He just withdrew.
The silence after the wedding was louder than the threat before it. My mother called once. Brief, careful. "Your father needs time." Time for what? I wanted to ask. To mourn the version of me he preferred? Instead, I said, "I understand." Mateo and I moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a florist shop downtown. The ceiling creaked when the wind shifted. The shower had to be coaxed into warm water. We had 2 mismatched chairs and a table someone had left on the curb. It felt like ours. The first month was tight. We budgeted everything. Mateo started his job at a non-profit youth center. I took a marketing role at a mid-sized agency. Not glamorous, but steady. One night, sitting cross-legged on the floor with takeout containers between us, I said quietly, "He thinks I'll come crawling back." Mateo didn't look offended. "He doesn't know you very well then." I smiled, but something inside me ached. A childhood memory surfaced around that time. I was 9. We were at a mall. I wanted a simple bracelet from a kiosk. My father glanced at it and said, "If you're going to buy something worth showing." Worth showing. That phrase had shaped more of my life than I realized. I wondered if he thought my marriage wasn't worth showing. At family gatherings, I stopped receiving invitations. Not explicitly excluded, just not included. Cousins sent photos of holidays I didn't attend. My aunt texted once, "Your dad says you're focusing on your new life," as if it were temporary, as if marriage were a phase. I told myself it was fine, but the quiet humiliation built in small ways. When a former family friend ran into me at the grocery store and asked, "So, how's the experiment going?" I realized my father had been talking. Experiment. That's what he called my marriage. Mateo never asked what people said. He didn't need to. He saw it in my shoulders when we drove past my old neighborhood and I turned my face toward the window. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It was my birthday, 29. No call, no message, not even a short, "Hope you're well." I sat on our couch that night and stared at my phone longer than I want to admit. Mateo brought out a small cake with crooked icing. He sang off-key on purpose to make me laugh. I did laugh. But later, when he was asleep, I stepped onto the balcony and cried quietly into my sleeve. Not because I missed the money, because I missed my father. The version of him who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up late helping me build a model bridge for science class. The man who once said, "You deserve the best." I just hadn't realized he meant best in currency. 6 months passed. We weren't struggling the way he'd predicted. We paid rent, built modest savings, cooked at home, found rhythm. Mateo even got a small promotion. Nothing flashy, just recognition for steady work. I posted a photo of us at a local community fundraiser. Casual, happy. An hour later, my father liked it. Not commented, liked. I stared at that tiny red heart for too long. 2 days later, he called. The number flashed on my screen and my stomach dropped. I stepped into the bedroom to take it. "Camila?" His voice sounded the same, controlled, measured. "Hi, Dad." Silence. "I saw your photo." "Yeah." "You look fine." "Fine." I almost laughed. "Thanks." Another pause. "I need to talk to you about something." My heart sped up. Was this it? An apology? A reconsideration? "I'm listening." "It's business." Of course it was. A project didn't close the way we expected. Cash flow is temporarily tight. I sat on the edge of the bed. I need a short-term loan. The room felt smaller. How much? He named a number. It was more than our entire annual rent. I blinked. Dad, I don't have that kind of money. I know you've always been good with saving. The irony almost made me dizzy. He had cut me off for marrying someone he considered poor, and now he was asking me? Why me? I asked quietly. A long exhale. Because banks complicate things. Complicate? As if this weren't already complicated. I felt something shift again inside me. Not anger, not triumph, just awareness. He assumed we would fail, and when we didn't, he recalculated. I thought about that folder in his office, the trust fund, the condition. I thought about my birthday, the silence, and I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about pride and power and who owed whom.
I didn't answer him right away. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, controlled, waiting, the way he used to wait for contractors to agree to his terms. "Dad," I said slowly, "why aren't you asking Uncle Javier?" Silence. "That's different." "How?" "He's already invested." There it was. Layers. So this isn't just a short-term cash flow issue. Another pause. Longer this time. "It's temporary," he said finally. "I just need liquidity." Liquidity. He always hid urgency behind technical language. I stared at the beige wall in our bedroom and remembered another conversation years ago. I was 16. I'd failed a math exam. He didn't yell. He said, "Weakness invites loss." "Loss of what?" I'd asked. "Leverage." That word again. Everything in his world was leverage. "Dad," I asked carefully, "are you in trouble?" A shift in his tone. I miscalculated a partner's reliability. That meant someone pulled out. "How much trouble?" "I'm handling it." He wasn't. I could hear it. When we hung up, I stayed sitting on the edge of the bed for a long time. Mateo found me there. "Was it him?" I nodded. "He needs money." Mateo didn't react the way I expected. No smirk, no bitterness. "How much?" I told him. He let out a low whistle. "That's not small." "No." "Can we?" Technically, yes. Over the last 6 months, something unexpected had happened. An account my grandmother had quietly set up for me years ago. She'd told me about it before she passed, but my father had always managed it. When he cut me off, I assumed it was gone. It wasn't. He couldn't touch it legally. It was structured differently. I hadn't told him, not out of spite, just privacy. Mateo and I had debated what to do with it. Invest, save, maybe use part of it to buy something modest. It wasn't extravagant wealth, but it was security. And now my father was asking for it without knowing it existed. That detail sat heavy in my chest. "Do you want to help him?" Mateo asked quietly. I didn't answer immediately. I thought about my wedding day, the empty chair where my father should have been. I thought about my birthday, the silence, and I thought about being 9 years old, showing him a school art project, a clay house I'd made. He'd picked it up and said, "The foundation needs work." Even then, I'd felt like he was talking about more than the clay. "I don't want him to lose everything," I admitted. "That doesn't mean you owe him rescue." Mateo's voice was calm, not defensive, not protective, just steady. That steadiness is what my father never saw. 2 days later, I met my father at the cafe he'd suggested. Neutral territory. He looked different. Not broken, but tighter. "How are things?" he asked casually. "Stable." He nodded once. "I didn't think I'd have to ask you." I raised an eyebrow slightly. Why? You're young. Translation, inexperienced. And you assumed I wasn't financially capable. His jaw flexed. I assumed your husband wouldn't prioritize long-term growth. There it was. Still measuring Mateo. I felt a small flicker of anger then. Dad, I asked quietly, why didn't you come to the wedding? He blinked, surprised by the shift. This isn't about that. It is for me. A long pause. I didn't agree with your decision. So you punished me. His eyes narrowed slightly. I set a boundary. No, he set a condition. There's a difference. Dad, I said softly, if I help you, what changes? He frowned. What do you mean? Do I get invited back, or am I still the daughter who married down? That question hung between us like something fragile. He looked away first. This isn't personal. It always was. I realized something then. He didn't see his actions as rejection. He saw them as strategy. Pressure creates correction. That's how he'd built his business. He thought I would bend. Instead, I built. I'll think about it, I said finally. He nodded once. Relief flickered across his face before he caught it. As we stood to leave, he added, almost casually, don't discuss this with anyone. I paused. Why? Because it complicates things. There it was again. Complication. Reputation. Control. And suddenly, something felt off. Not just about the money, but about what he wasn't saying. Because people who need help don't usually worry about who knows. They worry about survival. And for the first time, I wondered, was I being asked to help him or to hide something?
That last sentence stayed with me. Don't discuss this with anyone. It wasn't a request. It was a reflex. The same reflex he used in business: contain information, control perception. When I got home, I told Mateo everything anyway. Secrets have weight, and I wasn't carrying his alone. He doesn't want it public because it's bigger than liquidity, Mateo said quietly. I knew he was right. 2 days later, I did something I never imagined I would. I called Uncle Javier, not to gossip, to ask a question. Is Dad okay? I asked carefully. A long pause on the other end. He came to you too? That was answer enough. My chest tightened. How bad is it? Another pause, then a sigh. A development project stalled. Investors backed out. He leveraged personal assets to cover short-term obligations. If he can't bridge the gap, the bank steps in. Bridge the gap meant bail him out. Why didn't he say that? He won't admit vulnerability, my uncle said softly. Especially not to you. Especially not to the daughter who married poor. I thanked him and hung up. The truth felt heavier than the number he'd named. This wasn't about pride. It was about collapse. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay next to Mateo, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles. I remembered being 13 and overhearing my father arguing with a contractor on the phone. His voice sharp, controlled, dominant. After he hung up, he told me, never let them see you panic. Panic costs money. Maybe that's what this was. A man who had built his life on control, facing something he couldn't command. But here's what hurt the most. He had been willing to lose me to prove a point, and now he needed the stability he assumed I didn't have. The next morning, I checked the account my grandmother had left me. It was enough to cover his request. Not comfortably, but possible.
Matteo watched me as I stared at the numbers. "If you do this," he said gently, "do it because it aligns with who you are, not because you're trying to earn back anything." Earn back. That word hit hard. Had I been trying to earn back approval my whole life? Even marrying Matteo had felt like defiance. But maybe it was just choosing differently. I called my father that afternoon. "I know it's not just liquidity," I said calmly. Silence. "Who told you?" "It doesn't matter." Another pause. "You shouldn't have called Javier." There it was, control slipping. "You shouldn't have hidden the truth." His breathing shifted slightly. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." A long exhale. I expanded too quickly, trusted the wrong partner. If the bank calls in the loan, we lose the house. The house, the gated neighborhood, the symbol, the armor. For the first time, I heard something beneath his voice. Fear. Not for the business, for the image. "Why didn't you just tell me that?" I asked softly. "Because I didn't want you thinking I failed." The irony almost broke me. "You already thought I failed." Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. He didn't argue, because he couldn't. "I can help," I said finally. Relief rushed into his voice before he caught it. "But there's a condition." His tone shifted instantly. "I'm not signing anything that compromises your future." "It's not about paperwork." "Then what?" "You don't get to treat my marriage like a mistake anymore." Quiet. Not offended, just stunned. "And if I say no?" "Then I don't transfer the money." There it was. Leverage. But not cruel. Clear. This wasn't revenge. It was a boundary. He didn't speak for several seconds. "I don't owe your husband an apology. You owe me respect." The words came out steadier than I felt. "I won't hide this transaction. It won't be secret. If I help you, it's documented, transparent, no shame." Another long silence. The kind that changes something. "You've grown," he said quietly. "I had to. Not because of him, in spite of him." Finally, he said, "Fine." Not gracious, but not resistant either. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. I wasn't negotiating with my father as a child seeking approval. I was speaking as an equal.
We met at his office to sign the loan agreement. Not a handshake, not a quiet transfer. Paperwork, clear terms, repayment schedule, interest, modest but real, transparency. He read every line carefully. Of course he did. When he reached the signature page, he paused. "I never thought I'd be on this side of the desk," he said quietly. I didn't smile. "I never thought I'd be cut off for choosing love." He nodded once. That was the closest we came to revisiting it in that room. The money moved 2 days later, clean, documented, no secrets. The bank stepped back. The house remained his. For now. Weeks passed. He repaid the first installment on time, then the second. We didn't suddenly become close. There was no dramatic reconciliation dinner, but something fundamental shifted. He stopped referring to Matteo as your husband. He started using his name. Small, subtle, but intentional. One Sunday afternoon, he called and asked if we'd join them for lunch. No agenda, just lunch. I almost said no out of reflex. Old wounds don't disappear just because paperwork does. But Matteo squeezed my hand and said, "We can try." The house looked the same, but I didn't feel small walking through the door anymore. At the table, my father asked Matteo about his work, not sarcastically, genuinely. Matteo answered the way he always had, steady, thoughtful. My father listened, actually listened. At one point, he said something I never expected. "What you're doing matters." It wasn't loud, but it was sincere. Later, while my mother cleared plates, my father stepped outside with me onto the patio, the same patio where he'd once told me I was making a mistake. He leaned against the railing. "I was wrong about something," he said. I waited. "I thought financial struggle would break you." It almost had, not because of money, because of rejection. "But it didn't," he continued. "No," I said quietly, "it didn't." Another pause. "I built everything believing security was love," he admitted. "If I could provide enough, you'd never feel unsafe. And when I chose differently, it felt like rejection." There it was. Not about status, about being needed, about legacy. "You weren't protecting me," I said gently. "You were protecting your identity." He didn't argue, because he couldn't. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't require volume, just timing. He finished repaying the loan 3 months later. On the final transfer, he included something unexpected. A short message in the memo line. "Proud of you." I stared at it longer than I should have, not because I needed it, but because it came without conditions. We're not a perfect family now. We don't agree on everything. He still believes in leverage. I still believe in partnership. But something changed that afternoon in the cafe, when he asked for help and I didn't rush to earn back approval. I set terms, not to punish him, to protect myself. I think about that restaurant scene sometimes, the way he said, "Don't come back asking for anything." He thought love would make me dependent. It made me resilient. He thought marrying poor meant choosing instability. It meant choosing partnership. And when he needed help, I didn't slam the door. I just required respect to walk through it. The quiet humiliation of being cut off doesn't disappear overnight, but it transforms when you stop trying to prove yourself worthy. Worth isn't measured in net worth, or neighborhoods, or who signs the bigger check. It's measured in how you show up when it would be easier to walk away. If this story felt personal to you, tell me what boundary you had to set. Thank you for listening.